Hey there, this is your head coach, Steve Hopkins, and I'm bringing another leadership dimension to you. We're going to focus for just a few minutes on conflict management, and I'm actually actioning a self-conflict management intervention step right now because I decided to go out for a walk. I was feeling frustrated about a conflict, and I exited the process with permission to re-engage later. Wasn't volatile or anything like that, but I just kind of felt like we're at an impasse, and I said, you know what, how about we agree to connect at 3 o'clock and we pause right here. And I decided, after we decided that I'd go out for a walk and kind of clear my head. So it's perfect timing to talk about conflict management as it pertains to leadership and how important that is. Because there's one thing I've discovered is no matter how hard we try, we can mitigate against some conflict for sure. There's some skill in that, seeing it ahead, and then being able to tend to it before it really becomes an official conflict, I think, is what I've experienced. But other than that, conflict's going to happen because we're dealing with human beings, and you're one of them, and I'm one of them, and we're pretty darn complicated. And so some of that stuff presents issues. So maybe the first thing we can do is just agree, let's not go for the utopic never have a conflict mode, because then we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. Let's agree that we will have conflict, and we want to be great leaders getting through it and helping others get through it so that we can almost lean into it when we see it. We know that the conflict can bring some good things, strength and growth on the other side, some experiences that help us with future conflicts. And so it's not so much if, but when. And so let's get ready for it, okay? Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about what we're talking about, and I just throw some words at you that maybe spark some interest. Words like limiting and removing. Those are verbs, right? So if you're doing conflict management, right, moving people effectively through conflict, then we're involved in limiting and removing conflict. Addressing and resolving. Oh, those are powerful words, right? So addressing conflict. Even if it's conflict you're involved in, you can still address it. If you're helping others get through conflict, you're helping them address it, right? But addressing and resolving. Restoring. Ooh, wow. As a bona fide, certifiable peacemaker addict, I would tell you that restoring harmony is definitely an objective, and sometimes we can go too far with that, but we're certainly in that business or have that opportunity. All right. So, why is this important to us? Like, I think sometimes with conflict, it's so easy to apply the personal benefits to business only, and we miss some of the other benefits to business impact here. And so I just want to share a couple of those with you. The things that we do know is we can help relationships grow instead of fracture. That holds true for sure. I think in our personal lives, we don't want to hit what we would call stalemates or impasses. The same can be true in businesses. I've seen partnerships dissolve just because we got so stuck that we couldn't figure out how to move forward. And not just the businesses dissolve, the partnerships dissolve, but even acquaintances after that dissolve because of that. And that's unfortunate. But here's one that I think is a little more specific to business as far as an impact. And that is that it enables us, so the better we are at conflict management, it helps us overcome challenges in performance. All right, so a lot of times we have conflicts evolve because people are dissatisfied with performance. That's kind of the trigger. And so intuitively we say, well, if we get better at that, what's going to happen? Well, the performance that was the trigger is now the celebratory effect of managing conflict. Okay, now I'm in. So we get better at conflict management, and that increases our performance. I love that, all right? And again, we can be the champion of conflict management just by having an attitude that we're not just freakishly focused on avoiding it at all costs. We're okay with it occasionally. Sometimes I get involved in a conflict with a couple people and I say, hey, I was wondering when this was going to happen. It's okay. All right, so let's just sit down. Let's chat, sort this out. And I knew this was happening, and you guys can probably predict it's going to happen too. Okay? Now, how are we going to get through it? You know, do we want to get through it in some positive ways, or do we want this to spiral down? And so you can be a beacon of light in that way as well, which is really awesome. How do we see people that are great at this? Well, again, some of this seems pretty intuitive, but you kind of find people that are practical. They just seem practical, right? It's like no nonsense, practical. It's not too theoretical. It's like, hey, we can figure this out, and don't we want to, and all that kind of stuff, right? I see people that are open to compromise. Now, not compromising like, hey, good versus bad, or anything like that, but compromising like a version of good versus somebody else's version of good. Like there's ways to do this, right? I think that's really important. I think one of the skills that we talk about, and there's other videos on this, is empathy. You'll see people that exercise good empathetic, practices are really good at conflict management as well. And so the opposites are those things that we get nervous about. We're like, oh, I don't see this getting any better. We're involved with people that are inflexible. God forbid we have a mediator that's jumping into a conflict that appears to be inflexible. That's not going to help. Overly competitive, like we're in it to win instead of in it to be good and get everybody through it. If we're in it to win, we're going to be in trouble. And at the same time, we can be somebody that yields too easily. Like the easiest path is just to give in. We talked about compromisation before. So we can compromise just for the sole purpose of avoiding conflict. And then we appear weak. And if we're being chartered to get outcomes, then we're going to be sacrificing outcomes just to keep the peace. All right? And I know for one, I was a person that had a lot of problem with that at point. I felt like being a peacemaker was the best outcome. And if we got some good outcomes along the way, great. If we didn't, it was just better to have everybody getting along. And you will run into performance issues there for sure, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things we can do here. So these are our practice things. Remember, we go to awareness and we prioritize something we want to work on to add some capability, some courage, some confidence to the skills that we're working on. And you can get better at conflict management. All right, you can. All right, one of the things, this is a journal activity I love. We do a lot of observational journal activities, right? So get involved in a conversation, especially with more than one person, so that it's not a one-on-one, right? You can be a little bit of an observer. Maybe you're in a conflict management situation, right? And what you want to pay close attention to are emotional signals. All right, so there's the content, there's the people's case. It's almost like you're going in front of a judge, right, with a case, and there's the plaintiff, and you're in a court case almost. So you're listening to the facts and trying to, who's right, and we get into that mode. But I want you to get in a mode where you're looking for emotional signals. How are people emotionally involved or charged in this? And note that. Just become a better observer so you can kind of see that high, low, what spectrum, what element of emotionality is involved. What level of impassioned, what got triggered, what else is there besides the facts. All right, is a great bit to add then when you play your part in conflict management. Okay? Believe me, conflict management is not all about the content. It's not all about the facts, right? It's about emotion and intentionality. That's why influence and empathy play such big parts in this, managing other people. Okay? So that's one. Then we're going to really jump into a refreshed version of the influence pathway. Okay? And remember that pathway. We want to we want to involve asking questions, restating, and validating. One of the biggest challenges in conflict management is misinterpretation, lack of clarity, and high levels of assumption. You can write that down, all right, as far as key points, all right? We're missing intentionality, so lack of known intention, right? Lack of clarity, and high level of assumptions. I thought you knew, clearly you understand. And it's like, no, that assumption I want to challenge, I don't know. So we can ask questions and then restate what you've heard and ask if that's true. Validate, just clear the air. Take all of that stuff out of it so that we can add the practicality of facts. And we can kind of move the other stuff to the side. We can acknowledge it. I understand why you're so passionate. All right, great. And so we have that. All right, but then the content to that is X. All right, and just walk through that exercise. Ask a question, restate it, right, what you heard, and validate that is, in fact, what they meant, what they said. Is there more? Those things are really, really awesome, all right? And then the last thing I'll throw in is the word values, all right? And sometimes you can just ask a why question once in a while to see if you can clarify a value that could be at the heart of everything we're talking about. Because people are going to be very slow to compromise on values. They may masquerade values, in other fact ways or emotional ways, right? And so we get a bunch of fluffy cloud blocking the way of saying, this is just something fundamentally that I believe so strongly. And that's why I've kind of got a stake in the ground. It's like, oh, okay, so tell me more about that so that I can really get a solid backstory on something that's really important. Because, even though we're talking about kind of a conflict moving through a little bit of a negotiation, a conversation, the sooner we know about something that somebody is quite adamant about, the sooner we kind of know what our variance playing field is. And sometimes we can even just share that and say, hey, the compromise here is just being aware of those values. Nobody's asking you to adopt somebody else's values or change yours. But we're in conflict because, those are just showing up and it seems like they're being challenged, and the reality is they're not. They're just foreign to the other person, right? And so we're disagreeing because we want to make a point. We're disagreeing because we feel uncomfortable. Could be whatever. And if we just shed a light on values, sorry about the noise there, sometimes that can be really beneficial. So just a few things there. Pick one of those that you think is interesting to you, that you can think one of them is a journal activity, a couple of them are conversation action activities. And I think you'll find that those are things that kind of move you forward. I've worked my way back home. I feel much calmer just talking to you. And 3 o'clock today, I'll be ready to re-engage with my other party and probably practice one of these myself, okay? So, hey, hopefully these help, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the other side of the river.